The thunder cracked like a whip across the sky as Zafina pressed herself against the cold wall of the corridor, her breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. Blood dripped from the cut on her arm, each drop hitting the ancient wooden floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the suffocating silence between the storm's fury. She clutched the silver candelabra in her trembling hands, holding it out like a weapon, like it could actually protect her from whatever was hunting her in the darkness of this cursed mansion. Behind her, something growled. Not human, not animal, something in between, something that made every instinct in her body scream to run, to flee, to get as far away from this place as possible. But her legs wouldn't move. Fear had rooted her to the spot, and all she could do was whisper into the darkness, her voice cracking with terror. "Stay back. I know what you are." The words had barely left her lips when a pale hand shot out from the shadows, moving faster than anything should be able to move. It grabbed her wrist with impossible strength, and she screamed. The candelabra clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the empty corridor like a death knell. Lightning flashed outside the tall windows, illuminating the figure before her for just a moment. But it was enough. More than enough. Min Jihyuk stood inches from her face, his skin pale as moonlight, his eyes burning crimson red in the darkness. Blood stained his lips, fresh and glistening, and when he spoke, she could see the fangs that had torn into something. Someone, somewhere in this mansion tonight. "You shouldn't have come to the 3rd floor," he said, his voice like silk wrapped around a blade, beautiful and deadly all at once. Zafina's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. This was it. This was how she died. Not in Lagos, not in Accra, but in a mansion in Korea, killed by a vampire who had hired her to clean his house. The irony would have been funny if she wasn't so terrified she could barely breathe. But then his eyes shifted, looking past her, and something changed in his expression. The predatory hunger gave way to something else. Concern, urgency, fear even. Heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere below. Men's voices shouting in Korean, getting closer. The sound of doors being kicked open, glass shattering, violence approaching like a tidal wave. Jihyuk's grip on her wrist tightened, and he pulled her close. So close she could feel the unnatural coldness radiating from his body. "They'll kill you," he whispered, his breath cold against her ear. "You're bleeding. They'll smell it. Come with me if you want to live." Zafina stared into those crimson eyes, and in that moment, suspended between the vampire in front of her and the gangsters below, she had to make a choice. Trust the monster she knew, or face the monsters she had tried to escape. She nodded. Jihyuk moved, and the world became a blur. Before you find out what happens next, if you're loving this story so far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2. Drop a comment below telling me whether you'd trust the vampire or take your chances with the gangsters. And smash that like button to help this story reach more people. Now, let me tell you how it all started. 3 weeks earlier, everything had been different. 3 weeks earlier, Zafina Mensah had been just another broke international student trying to survive in Seoul, not running for her life in a vampire's mansion. But life has a way of changing faster than you can blink, especially when you make the kind of desperate choices that haunt you forever. The streets of Hongdae were alive with the chaos of a Friday night, neon lights painting the sidewalks in electric blues and pinks, music spilling from clubs and bars, couples walking hand in hand, groups of friends laughing and shouting to each other over the noise. Zafina pushed through the crowds, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand clutching the strap of her worn backpack like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Mama, I'll send the money. Promise. The hospital will wait," she said in Chui, trying to keep her voice steady even though panic was rising in her throat like bile. On the other end of the line, her mother's weak voice tried to reassure her that everything would be fine, that she shouldn't worry, that God would provide. But Zafina knew better. God helped those who help themselves, and right now she was running out of ways to help. She hung up and immediately opened her banking app, staring at the number that seemed to mock her from the screen. 142,001. In dollars, barely over 100. Her rent was due in 3 days. Tuition for next semester was due in 2 weeks. And her mother needed 5 million won for surgery, or the tumor in her stomach would kill her within 6 months. 5 million won. $3,700. It might as well have been 5 billion. She had nothing. Less than nothing. She had debt. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she looked down at the screen. Unknown number. But she knew exactly who it was. Her stomach twisted into knots as she opened the message. Payment overdue. Last warning. Meet me tonight. Bring cash or bring something better. Zafina stopped walking, letting the crowd flow around her like she was a stone in a river. She wanted to throw the phone. She wanted to scream. She wanted to disappear. But none of those things would solve her problem. None of those things would save her mother or get Choi Yongo off her back. Choi Yongo. Just thinking his name made her skin crawl. 6 months ago, she had been so desperate, so stupid, walking into that underground club in Gangnam with her friend Mina, who had promised her there was a solution to all her money problems. Easy money, Mina had said. Just a loan. Just pay it back over time. Everyone does it. Everyone doesn't do it, Zafina had learned. Only desperate people do it. And desperate people end up in situations exactly like this. She had borrowed 10 million won. The interest rate had seemed reasonable at the time, especially compared to how much she needed. She would work extra shifts at the convenience store, tutor more students in English, maybe pick up some modeling gigs. She could do it. She was smart. She was hardworking. She was going to make it work. Except the interest rates weren't reasonable. They were predatory. And they compounded weekly. By the end of the first month, she owed 12 million. By the end of the second, 15. Now, 6 months later, the number had ballooned to 25 million won, and Yongo was done waiting. Zafina looked at the address he had sent her. A gambling den in Gangnam, hidden behind a legitimate-looking restaurant. She knew what these places were. She had heard the stories. Places where the desperate went to get more desperate, where the powerful preyed on the weak, where people disappeared and no one asked questions because no one cared. But what choice did she have? She took the subway to Gangnam, watching her reflection in the dark windows as the train hurtled through tunnels beneath Seoul. When had she started looking so tired? When had the dark circles under her eyes become permanent? When had she stopped being the bright-eyed girl who had arrived in Korea 2 years ago with dreams of getting her degree and making her family proud? The gambling den looked exactly as seedy as she had imagined. She descended a narrow staircase behind a restaurant that smelled of grilled meat and soju, following the sound of voices and the haze of cigarette smoke that seemed to seep through the walls. At the bottom, a large man blocked her path, looking her up and down with cold eyes. "I'm here to see Choi Yongo," she said in Korean, proud that her voice didn't shake. The man grunted and stepped aside, pushing open a heavy door. The noise hit her like a physical force. Men shouting, cards slapping against tables, the rattle of dice, the electronic chimes of illegal gambling machines. The room was packed with people, all of them looking like they were either about to get rich or lose everything they had. Probably the latter. Yongo sat at a VIP table in the back, surrounded by men in expensive suits who looked more like bodyguards than friends. He was younger than she had expected when she first met him, only 35, with sharp features and sharper eyes, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her entire year's tuition. He looked up as she approached, and a smile spread across his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Zafina SSI," he said, using the Korean honorific like it meant something, like he actually respected her. "You look terrible. No money again." She stood in front of his table, very aware of how out of place she was here. The only woman, the only black person, the only one who looked like she didn't belong in this world of underground gambling and criminal enterprise. "Give me 2 more weeks," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I'm getting extra shifts at work. I can." 2 weeks. Yongo laughed, cold and sharp. The men around him laughed too, like they had been waiting for a punchline. "I gave you 6 months, Zafina SSI. 6 months of patience. 6 months of interest piling up because you couldn't pay. Do you know what happens to people who don't pay me?" He stood up and walked around the table, and before she could step back, he grabbed her wrist, hard enough to hurt. His grip was iron, and when she tried to pull away, he only squeezed harder. "Your student visa doesn't protect you here," he said softly, his face inches from hers. "You disappear, no one asks questions. Not the police, not your school, not your friends. You're just another foreigner who came to Korea and left quietly. Do you understand?" Behind him, one of his men, a large, muscular guy she had heard someone call Kwan, cracked his knuckles. The message was clear: pay up or suffer. Zafina felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I don't have the money. You know I don't have it." Yango released her wrist and stepped back, his expression shifting from menacing to calculating. "But I have an alternative," he said slowly, watching her face. "There's a job. 1 month. Live-in position. High pay. 30 million won." Zafina blinked. 30 million won? That would clear her debt and leave her with 5 million for her mother's surgery. It was almost too good to be true, which meant it absolutely was too good to be true. "Doing what?" she asked suspiciously. "Housemaid. For a very particular client. He's wealthy, eccentric, pays extremely well because most people don't stay longer than 2 weeks." "Why not?" Yango smiled, and this time there was something almost amused in his expression. "They say the house is cursed. People hear things, see things. Staff quits or disappears. But you don't believe in ghosts, do you, Zafina SSI? You're a smart girl, modern, educated." She wanted to say no. Every instinct told her this was a trap, that nothing good could come from accepting a job offered by a loan shark in an underground gambling den. But then she thought of her mother, lying in a hospital bed in Lagos, waiting for a surgery that would never come if Zafina didn't find the money. She thought of the debt that would follow her forever if she didn't clear it now. She thought of disappearing quietly, like Yango had threatened. "If I do this," she said slowly, "we're done? The debt is completely cleared. Completely clear. 1 month. That's all. You clean the house, you cook the meals, you follow the rules. 30 million won cash at the end of 30 days. Then we never see each other again." He slid a contract across the table, along with a key on a black ribbon. The contract was in Korean and English, surprisingly official looking. She scanned it quickly. Room and board provided. No days off. Must live on site for the full 30 days. A list of rules that seemed oddly specific. No opening curtains during daytime, no entering certain rooms, no leaving the property without permission. "You start tomorrow," Yango said. "A car will pick you up from your apartment at 8 a.m. Don't try to run, Zafina SSI. I know where you live. I know where your mother is being treated. I know everything about you. This is your only option." Zafina stared at the contract, at the key, at the man who held her life in his hands. Then she picked up the pen and signed. The next morning came too quickly. Zafina had barely slept, spending the night packing a small bag and researching curses, haunted houses, and anything else that might explain why no one stayed at this mysterious mansion for longer than 2 weeks. She found nothing useful, just vague rumors and deleted forum posts about a wealthy recluse who owned property in the hills outside Seoul. The black car arrived exactly at 8 a.m., as promised. The driver was silent, refusing to answer any of her questions as they left the city behind and drove into the mountains. The higher they climbed, the more isolated everything became. Trees pressed in on both sides of the narrow road, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out the morning sun. Fog rolled across the landscape, thick and gray, making it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. Finally, after nearly an hour of driving, they arrived at a pair of enormous iron gates. The driver pressed a button on a remote, and the gates swung open with a groan that sounded like something from a horror movie. Beyond them, at the end of a long, winding driveway, stood the mansion. Zafina's breath caught in her throat. It was enormous, a bizarre fusion of Korean traditional architecture and European Gothic style. Dark wood and stone, multiple levels, peaked roofs with elaborate carvings, tall windows that looked like empty eyes staring down at her. The gardens surrounding it were dead, Nothing but withered plants and bare trees, as if nothing living could survive here. The car stopped in front of the main entrance, and the driver finally spoke. "End of the line," he said in Korean. "Good luck." He didn't wait for her to get her bag from the trunk before driving away, leaving her alone in the fog with nothing but a key and a contract that was probably the worst decision she had ever made. The mansion door loomed in front of her, carved with intricate patterns that might have been beautiful once but now just looked ominous. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open on silent hinges. The entrance hall beyond was dark, illuminated only by a few candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing in the emptiness. No response. She stepped inside, her footsteps loud on the marble floor, and the door swung shut behind her with a soft click that sounded like a lock engaging. "You're late." Zafina spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood in the shadows at the edge of the entrance hall, so still she hadn't noticed him. He stepped forward into the candlelight, and she got her first real look at Min Jihyuk. He was beautiful in a way that made her uncomfortable, like a painting of an angel that was too perfect to be real. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with pale skin that almost seemed to glow in the dim light, dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, and features that could have been carved from marble. He wore an expensive black suit with a black shirt beneath it, no tie, the top button undone. Everything about him screamed wealth and power and danger. "Zafina Mensah," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Nigerian Ghanaian, 24 years old, international business student at Yonsei University. Current debt, 25 million won." She stared at him, unsure whether to be impressed or terrified that he knew so much about her. "How do you? I know everything about people who enter my home," he interrupted, walking past her toward a staircase that curved upward into darkness. "You'll clean, cook, and maintain the house. The kitchen is fully stocked. Your room is on the second floor, east wing. Do not enter the third floor. Do not go into the west wing after sunset. Do not ask questions about what you hear at night. Do not open any curtains or windows during the day." He turned to face her, and she noticed something odd. There was a large mirror on the wall behind him, ornate and ancient-looking. She could see herself in it clearly. She could see the entrance hall, the staircase, the candles. But she couldn't see him. Where Min Jihyuk stood, the mirror showed nothing but empty space. "Do you understand the rules?" he asked, pulling her attention back to his face. Yes," she managed. "But why can't I? I said no questions." His voice was sharp now, all pretense of politeness gone. "Break any rule, you leave immediately. No exceptions. No second chances. The debt goes back to Yongo, and you lose everything. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear," Zafina said, trying to match his coldness with her own. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to her. "Your detailed duties and schedule. Meals should be prepared and left in the dining room. I won't be eating with you. Change the sheets in the master bedroom daily. Never enter my study. And most importantly, if you hear screaming at night, ignore it. Do not investigate. Do not try to help. Stay in your room with the door locked until morning." "Screaming?" Zafina repeated, unable to help herself. "What kind of screaming?" Jihyuk's expression didn't change. "The kind you ignore if you value your life. Now I'll show you to your quarters. You start work immediately." He led her through the mansion, and with each room they passed, Zafina's sense of unease grew. Everything was beautiful but frozen, like a museum where no one actually lived. Antique furniture covered in dust. Paintings on the walls showing landscapes and people from centuries ago. No photographs. No personal items. No signs that anyone had laughed or cried or lived in these rooms for a very long time. Her room was surprisingly nice, large, with a comfortable-looking bed, a desk, a private bathroom. A window looked out over the dead gardens and the fog-shrouded forest beyond. But there were heavy blackout curtains, and Jihyuk made a point of telling her to keep them closed at all times. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said from the doorway. "Dinner should be ready by 6 p.m. Leave it in the dining room. I'll eat later." "Wait," Zafina said before she could stop herself. "Will I ever actually see you? Or are you just going to be a ghost in this house?" Something flickered across Jihyuk's face. Amusement, maybe, or annoyance. "You'll see me," he said. "More than you probably want to. Welcome to your new home, Zafina Mensah. I hope you last longer than the others." Then he was gone, moving so quickly and quietly that she didn't even hear his footsteps retreating down the hall. She stood in her new room, surrounded by luxury and suffocating isolation, and wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. The first week was strange but manageable. Zafina fell into a routine of sorts, though it was unlike any job she had ever had. She would wake early, explore the parts of the mansion she was allowed to access, and clean rooms that never seemed to get dirty. She would prepare elaborate meals following recipes from a cookbook in the kitchen, meals that required expensive ingredients and careful preparation, and leave them in the dining room as instructed. But Jihyuk never ate them. She knew because she would check the next morning, and the food would be untouched, perfectly arranged exactly as she had left it. It would have been insulting if it wasn't so bizarre. What kind of person hired a live-in cook and never ate the food? She saw him only at night. He would appear suddenly, always when she least expected it, standing in doorways or at the end of hallways, watching her work with those intense, unreadable eyes. He never spoke unless she spoke first, and even then, his responses were brief, cryptic, dismissive. On the third night, she caught him staring at her while she dusted the library. She turned around, and there he was, sitting in a leather chair she could have sworn was empty a moment ago. A book open in his lap but his eyes fixed on her. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, trying to sound braver than she felt. "No," he said simply. But he didn't look away, and she felt like he was studying her, cataloging every detail, searching for something she couldn't identify. "Then why are you watching me?" "Because you're in my house. I watch everything in my house." "That's creepy. That's survival." She wanted to ask what he meant, but she remembered the rule about not asking questions. Instead, she went back to dusting, very aware of his gaze on her back, until she finally finished and left the room. When she glanced back, the chair was empty again, and the book lay closed on the side table. It was like he had never been there at all. On the fifth night, she made a mistake. She was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for herself, when she accidentally sliced her finger with a knife while cutting vegetables. It wasn't a bad cut, just a small nick, but blood welled up immediately, bright red against her dark skin. "Damn it," she muttered, turning toward the sink to rinse it off. But before she could take a step, Jihyuk was there. Right there, inches from her, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, pulling her hand toward his face. His eyes were fixed on the blood, and as she watched in frozen horror, his pupils dilated, his lips parted, and she saw them. Fangs. Sharp, white, unmistakable fangs where his canine teeth should be. "Let go," she whispered, but her voice came out weak, terrified. Jihyuk brought her bleeding finger close to his mouth, so close she could feel his cold breath on her skin. He inhaled deeply, his eyes fluttering closed like he was savoring the most exquisite perfume. His whole body seemed to tense, muscles coiling like a predator about to strike. Then, with visible effort, he released her and stepped back, turning away sharply. "Clean it," he said, his voice strained and harsh. "Now, don't bleed in my house." Before she could respond, he was gone, moving with that impossible speed, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her bleeding finger and the sudden, crystal-clear understanding of what he was. Min Jihyuk was a vampire. She was living in a mansion with an actual vampire, and she had just signed a contract to stay here for 30 days. The next few days, she didn't see him at all. She cleaned, she cooked, she followed the rules, but Jihyuk remained absent. The mansion felt even more like a tomb, silent except for the sounds she made herself. She should have been relieved. Instead, she found herself looking for him, listening for his footsteps, wondering where he was, and if he was avoiding her because of what had happened in the kitchen. On the seventh night, unable to sleep, she made another mistake. She left her room and wandered the halls, telling herself she was just exploring. But really, she was looking for answers. The mansion was full of locked doors and forbidden spaces, but one door, the door to what she thought was Jihyuk's study, was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the dark hallway. She knew she shouldn't. The rules were clear. But curiosity and fear and the desperate need to understand what she had gotten herself into drove her forward. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The study was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with books in Korean, English, Chinese, Japanese, and languages she didn't recognize. A massive desk sat in the center, covered in papers and maps and what looked like ancient manuscripts. But what caught her attention were the paintings leaning against the walls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stacked 3 or 4 deep. She walked closer and realized they were all paintings of the same subject. Landscapes, but all of them dark, melancholy, beautiful but sad. Moonlit forests, empty streets in rain, abandoned temples. Every single one was exquisite and haunting, signed in the corner with a name she couldn't read. "I paint what I see," a voice said from behind her. She spun around. Jihyuk stood in the doorway, wearing black as always, his expression unreadable. She waited for him to be angry, to tell her she had broken the rules and had to leave. But he just walked past her to stand in front of one of the paintings. A full moon reflecting on still water. 300 years, he said quietly. That's how long I've been painting. How long I've been here. How long I've been alone. Zafina's breath caught. 300 years. You're a vampire, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. That's why you don't eat. Why you have no reflection. Why you only come out at night. Yes, just like that. No denials. No anger. Just acceptance. Are you going to kill me? She asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Jihyuk turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes besides coldness. Sadness. Deep, ancient sadness that made her chest ache. I'm going to do something worse, he said. I'm going to let you stay. And that's when everything changed. They began to talk. Not during the day, she never saw him then, but at night after she had finished her duties. He would appear in whatever room she was in, and they would have these strange, stilted conversations that gradually became less strange and more human. She told him about her life, about growing up between Nigeria and Ghana, about coming to Korea with dreams of making something of herself, about her mother and the debt and the desperation that had led her here. He listened without judgment, without pity, just quiet understanding. And slowly, carefully, he told her about himself, about being turned in 1723, during the Joseon dynasty, when he was a nobleman's son, about watching his family age and die while he remained frozen at 35, about the woman he had loved, the woman he had married, who had died because he hadn't been strong enough to protect her from those who discovered what he was. She looked like you, he said one night, when they were in the library together. She was cataloging books and he was simply there, existing in her space in a way that had become comfortable. Not exactly, but similar. Your eyes, your smile, the way you refuse to be afraid even when you should be. I am afraid, Zafina admitted, of you, of this place, of what happens when the 30 days are over. Good, Jihyuk said. Fear keeps you alive. But despite his words, despite everything she knew about what he was, Zafina found herself less afraid and more curious, more drawn to him, this beautiful, lonely creature who painted sad landscapes and grew roses in the dead garden that refused to bloom because they needed sunlight and he could never give them that. She found him there one night, in the greenhouse attached to the east wing, kneeling beside pots of withered rose bushes, his hands in the soil like he was trying to will them to live through sheer force of will. Plants need sunlight, she said gently, standing in the doorway. I know, he replied, not looking up, but I keep trying. Every year for 300 years, I plant roses and every year they die. But I can't stop, because if I stop trying to create life, then all I am is death. Zafina walked over and knelt beside him, not caring about the dirt on her clothes. Why roses? Because she loved them. My wife. She would fill our home with roses every spring. After she died, I promised myself I would grow them in her memory. But the sun kills me, and the roses need the sun, so I can never give them what they need. Just like I could never give her what she needed. A normal life, safety, a future. Without thinking, Zafina reached out and touched his hand. It was cold, but not unpleasant, like marble that had been kept in the shade. Jihyuk froze, staring at where her warm, living hand covered his cold, dead one. You're not death, she said softly. You're just lonely. He looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw 300 years of isolation, of loss, of longing for connection that he had denied himself because he believed he didn't deserve it. And in that moment, something shifted between them, something neither of them could take back. The days blurred together after that. 3 weeks passed in a strange dream. She would clean and cook and follow the rules. But the mansion felt less like a prison and more like a secret world that only the two of them inhabited. They talked for hours. He showed her his art collection. Paintings and sculptures from every era imaginable. Some worth millions. All of them collected over centuries of existence. She taught him about modern technology, laughing at his confusion over smartphones and social media. You're hundreds of years old, but you don't know what TikTok is? I know what I need to know to survive, he said, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. Everything else is just noise. They watched movies together on the enormous television in the private theater. He preferred old films, classics from the 1940s and 50s, black and white romances that ended in tragedy more often than not. She made him watch Marvel movies just to see his reactions to modern special effects. This is ridiculous, he muttered during a particularly explosive fight scene. This is fun, she countered. You remember fun, right? Or did you forget how to have fun sometime in the last 3 centuries? He looked at her, and slowly, impossibly, he smiled. A real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger, more alive, more human than she had ever seen him. I'm remembering, he said quietly, but underneath all of it, there was tension, the awareness of what he was and what she was, predator and prey, monster and human. The way his eyes would sometimes linger on her neck, on the pulse point where her blood flowed just beneath the skin. The way he would suddenly leave a room when she got too close, like he didn't trust himself to be near her. And there was the way she felt, which was the most dangerous thing of all. She was falling for him, this impossible, beautiful, tragic creature who had been alone for so long he had forgotten how to be anything else. She wanted to touch him, to comfort him, to make him believe that he deserved to be happy after centuries of punishing himself for things that weren't his fault. On the 21st night, they almost kissed. They were in the greenhouse, and she had brought him UV-filtered grow lights she had ordered online, hoping they might help the roses grow without hurting him. He stared at them like she had given him the moon. Why would you do this? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Because you want them to live, she said simply. And I want you to have something that makes you happy. He looked at her with such intensity it stole her breath. Then he reached out and cupped her face with his cold hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You make me happy, he whispered. For the first time in 300 years, I look forward to sunset because it means I get to see you. He leaned in, and she rose to meet him, their lips inches apart, her heart racing so fast she thought it might explode. But at the last second, he pulled away, turning from her sharply. I can't, he said, his voice anguished. Zafina, I can't give you what you deserve. I'm dead. I'm a monster. You deserve sunlight and life and a future. And all I can offer you is darkness. I don't care, she said, reaching for him. I don't care what you are. You should. He looked back at her, and his eyes were filled with pain. In 9 days, you'll leave here with your money. You'll save your mother. You'll finish your degree. You'll have a life. And I'll still be here, in the dark, alone. That's how it has to be. Why does it have to be like that? Because I'm dangerous. Because I watch you sleep sometimes, and I imagine what it would be like to taste you. Because every moment I'm near you, I'm fighting the urge to sink my fangs into your throat and drink until there's nothing left. That's what I am, Zafina. A monster in a cage who wants desperately to get out. She should have been terrified. She should have run. But instead, she felt her heart breaking for him, for the torture of being so close to something he wanted but denying himself because he thought he didn't deserve it. You're not a monster, she said firmly. You're just scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of losing someone again. But living like this, isolating yourself for 300 years, that's not living at all. Before he could respond, her phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the moment. She looked at the screen. Her mother's nurse. Her heart dropped. I have to take this, she said. And Jihyuk nodded, his expression closing off again, the walls slamming back into place. She answered the phone and listened to the nurse explain that her mother's condition was worsening, that the surgery needed to happen sooner than expected, that if they didn't operate within the next 2 weeks, it might be too late. I'll have the money, Zafina said, tears streaming down her face. I promise. Just 2 more weeks. When she hung up, Jihyuk was gone. She stood alone in the greenhouse surrounded by dying roses and UV lights that might save them, and she cried. The next day, everything fell apart. Well, everything didn't fall apart until Zafina got a phone call from Yongo. She was in her room trying to distract herself with studying when her phone buzzed. Unknown number again, but she knew. She always knew when it was him. Time to earn your keep, Zafina SSI. Yongo's oily voice slithered through the speaker. I need you to do something for me. The deal was I work here for 30 days and my debt is cleared, she said, gripping the phone tighter. Nothing else. The deal is whatever I say it is, Yongo said, his tone hardening. I want you to steal something for me. From Min Jihyuk's vault. Documents. Information about his assets, his properties, his business holdings. There's a vault in the mansion. I know it's there. Find it. Photograph everything inside. Send it to me. That wasn't part of our agreement. I'm not a thief. Yongo laughed, cold and sharp. You became a thief the moment you took my money and couldn't pay it back. Now you're just deciding what you're willing to steal. Your dignity? Already gone. Your future? Mortgaged to me. How about your mother's life? Are you willing to steal that too? Zafina felt her blood run cold. What are you talking about? I know which hospital she's in, Zafina SSI. I know what room. I know which nurses work which shifts. It would be such a tragedy if something happened. A mix-up with medications. A fall in the bathroom. These things happen in hospitals all the time, especially in Lagos where they're so understaffed and overworked. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. You wouldn't. Try me. You have 48 hours. Find the vault. Send me photos of everything inside. Or your mother has a very unfortunate accident. Your choice. He hung up before she could respond. Zafina sat on her bed, staring at the phone in her hand, feeling the walls of her life closing in around her. Every choice she had made, borrowing the money, taking this job, getting close to Jihyuk, every single choice had led her to this moment where she had to betray the one person who had shown her kindness in this nightmare, or watch her mother die. She spent the next day searching the mansion, looking for a vault she wasn't even sure existed. She avoided Jihyuk, unable to look him in the eye knowing what she was planning to do. Every room she cleaned, she searched. Every drawer she organized, she examined. Nothing. No vault. No safe. No hidden passages. Until the second night when desperation made her bold. She remembered the one place she absolutely wasn't allowed to go. The 3rd floor. The place Jihyuk had explicitly forbidden her from entering. If there was a vault anywhere in this mansion, it would be there. She waited until well past midnight, when the house was silent and Jihyuk was nowhere to be seen. Then she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The door at the top was locked, but she had been cleaning this mansion for 3 weeks. She knew where spare keys were kept. The third floor was different from the rest of the mansion. Darker, colder. The walls were bare stone instead of ornate wood paneling. The doors were heavy iron instead of carved wood. Felt like a dungeon, and maybe it was. Maybe this was where Jihyuk kept his secrets, the parts of himself he didn't want anyone to see. She moved through the corridor, testing doors. Most were locked. But one, the last one at the end of the hall, swung open when she touched it. Inside was what looked like a study, similar to the one on the first floor but more sparse. A desk, filing cabinets, and in the corner, behind a painting of a woman who looked hauntingly familiar, a wall safe. Zafina approached it with trembling hands. The painting showed a Korean woman in traditional hanbok, beautiful and serene, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. This was her, Jihyuk's wife, the woman he had loved and lost 300 years ago. The woman Zafina apparently resembled. She lifted the painting carefully and stared at the safe. Modern, electronic, requiring a code. She had no idea what the code might be, but she tried the obvious things. Jihyuk's birthday, if he had told her the truth about when he was turned. The year of the Joseon dynasty. Random number combinations. On the 7th try, the safe clicked open. The code had been 1723, the year he was turned. The year he lost everything. Inside were documents, legal papers, property deeds, corporate holdings showing that Min Jihyuk owned half of Seoul's real estate under various shell companies and false names. Bank accounts with numbers that made her eyes water. He wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest people in Korea, maybe in the world, and no one knew because he had hidden behind centuries of false identities and careful planning. But there was also something else. A folder with her name on it. Zafina Mensah. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside were photographs of her, arriving in Korea 2 years ago, walking to class, working at the convenience store, laughing with friends. There were background checks, financial records, everything about her life documented in meticulous detail. And there were notes in Jihyuk's handwriting, observations about her personality, her habits, her struggles. At the bottom was a letter addressed to Choi Yongo, dated 3 months ago. She read it with growing horror. I will take the girl. Send her to me when the debt becomes unmanageable. Offer her the job. Make sure she has no other choice. I'll pay you 500 million won for your cooperation. Zafina felt like she had been punched in the stomach. This whole thing, the debt, the job offer, being sent to this mansion, it had all been orchestrated by Jihyuk. He had paid Yongo to trap her, to force her here. But why? Why would he do this? She kept reading and found the answer in another note. This one older, yellowed with age. I saw her today in Hongdae. She was laughing with her friends. So full of life. She looks exactly like Mina. My Mina. 300 years, and finally, I found her again. Or someone who could be her. Someone who could make me remember what it's like to feel human. The papers slipped from her numb fingers. Jihyuk hadn't just hired her. He had hunted her, found her, manipulated her entire life to bring her to this mansion because she looked like his dead wife. Everything, the conversations, the almost kiss, the way he looked at her like she was precious. It was all a lie. She wasn't Zafina to him. She was just a replacement for someone he had lost centuries ago. You shouldn't have come to the 3rd floor, a voice said from behind her. She spun around. Jihyuk stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his eyes glowing faintly red in the darkness. How long had he been standing there? How much had he seen? You did this? Zafina said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt and betrayal. You orchestrated everything. The debt, the job, all of it. You paid Yongo to trap me and send me here. Yes, Jihyuk said simply. No denials. No excuses. Just that one devastating word. Why? Because I look like your wife? Because you're so pathetic and lonely that you had to manufacture a connection with someone who reminded you of someone you lost 300 years ago. Something flickered across his face. Pain. But she didn't care. She was done caring about his pain when he had caused hers. Was any of it real? She demanded. The conversations? The almost kiss? Or was I just playing a role in your sick fantasy? It was real, Jihyuk said, stepping into the room. It became real. Yes, I brought you here because you looked like her. Because I was lonely and desperate and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could have something that felt like what I lost. But then I got to know you, Zafina. Not Mina. You. And you're nothing like her. You're stronger, braver, more stubborn. You challenge me in ways she never did. You make me want to be better than what I am. That's real. That's the most real thing I've felt in 300 years. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? Zafina asked, tears streaming down her face. You've been lying to me since before I even met you. I know, Jihyuk said, and his voice was filled with anguish. I know, and I'm sorry. If I could take it back. If I could go back and do things differently. But you can't, Zafina interrupted. You can't take it back. And now Yongo is blackmailing me. He wants me to steal information from your vault and send it to him, or he's going to hurt my mother. So congratulations, Jihyuk. Your manipulation worked so well that now I'm trapped between betraying you or watching my mother die. How does that make you feel? Jihyuk's eyes flashed dangerous red. Yongo threatened your mother? Don't pretend you care. This is probably all part of your plan anyway. It's not, Jihyuk said, his voice dropping to something dark and lethal. I paid Yongo to send you here and leave you alone. If he's going back on our deal, then we're going to have a conversation about honoring agreements. Before Zafina could respond, the sound of shattering glass erupted from somewhere below, then voices shouting in Korean. Heavy footsteps on stairs. The mansion's alarm system began to wail. He's here, Jihyuk said, his body tensing. Yongo, he must have tracked your phone. What do we do? Zafina asked, fear temporarily overriding her anger. Jihyuk looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the predator that lived beneath the civilized exterior. You hide. I deal with uninvited guests. They have guns, Zafina said. I saw them when. She didn't get to finish. Jihyuk moved with that impossible speed, grabbing her wrist and pulling her from the room. They ran through the corridors of the third floor, and behind them, she could hear men shouting, doors being kicked open, the sound of an army searching for them. And that's when everything came full circle. That's when Zafina found herself pressed against the wall of a corridor, blood dripping from a cut on her arm where she had scraped it on broken glass, watching Jihyuk's eyes turn crimson as he smelled her blood and fought against his nature. That's when Yongo's men found them, and Jihyuk had to make a choice. Give in to his hunger or save her life. Come with me if you want to live, he had said, and she had made her choice. She chose him. Monster, manipulator, lonely creature who had orchestrated her life. She chose him, because in that moment, with death closing in from both sides, she realized something important. Yes, he had brought her here through manipulation. Yes, he had lied. But he had also shown her more honesty about who he was than anyone else ever had. He had shared his pain, his loneliness, his desperate hope that maybe he could have one more chance at connection before eternity swallowed him whole. And maybe that didn't excuse what he had done. But it made him human in a way that mattered more than whether his heart beat or his body needed blood to survive. Jihyuk pulled her through a hidden passage in the wall, moving so fast the world blurred around her. They emerged in the basement, a vast space filled with wine racks and storage. Behind them, she could hear Yongo's men searching, getting closer. There's a tunnel, Jihyuk said, pointing to a heavy door in the corner. It leads to the forest. You can escape. What about you? I'm going to remind Choi Yongo why people fear the dark. There was something in his voice that made her shiver. Not fear. Certainty. The absolute knowledge that the man who had invaded his home threatened his... what? His pet? His obsession? His love? That man was going to suffer. Don't kill him, Zafina said, grabbing Jihyuk's arm. Please. I know he deserves it, but don't become what he thinks you are. Jihyuk looked down at where her hand touched him. You still care, he said softly. After everything, you still care about my soul. Of course I do, you idiot, Zafina said, and she didn't know whether she wanted to kiss him or hit him. I'm in love with you. That doesn't stop just because you're terrible at expressing emotions and have the social skills of someone who's been alone for 3 centuries. For the first time since she had discovered his betrayal, Jihyuk smiled. A real smile, full of wonder and hope and something that might have been love if he let himself feel it. You shouldn't be in love with me. Probably not. But here we are. The sound of footsteps on the basement stairs ended the moment. Jihyuk's expression shifted, the predator returning. Hide in the tunnel. Don't come out until I come for you, no matter what you hear. Jihyuk! He kissed her, fast and desperate and full of all the things he couldn't say out loud. Then he pushed her toward the tunnel. Go. Trust me. For once, just trust me. So she did. She ran into the tunnel and pulled the heavy door almost closed, leaving just a crack so she could see what happened. Her heart hammered as Yongo and his men poured into the basement, at least 15 of them, all armed with guns and knives and one guy carrying what looked like a flamethrower because apparently they had come prepared for a vampire. Yongo stood in the center, wearing an expensive suit and a smile that made Zafina's skin crawl. Min Jihyuk, he called out. I know you're here. I know what you are. And I know you care about the girl, which means I have leverage. Jihyuk stepped out from behind a wine rack, moving with eerie calm. You broke our agreement, Yongo. I paid you 500 million won to send her here and leave her alone. Threatening her mother violates our contract. Contracts are meaningless when I realized what you really are, Yongo said. Do you know how much you're worth? The real estate alone is worth trillions. But there are people who would pay even more for a vampire. Living vampire. Think of the pharmaceutical applications, the military applications. You're not a person, Min Jihyuk. You're a product waiting to be sold. You can try, Jihyuk said quietly. But first, you'll have to catch me. He moved, and the basement erupted into chaos. Jihyuk was fast, faster than the men could track. But there were so many of them. Gunshots rang out, bullets ricocheting off stone walls. Zafina watched in horror as several bullets hit Jihyuk, his body jerking with each impact, blood, dark and wrong-looking, blooming on his shirt. But he didn't stop. He grabbed one man and threw him across the basement like he weighed nothing. He disarmed another, moving the gun before the man could even process what was happening. He was a blur of violence and grace, 300 years of survival instinct concentrated into pure, lethal efficiency. But then one of Yongo's men fired something different. A spear-like projectile made of silver that caught Jihyuk in the shoulder. He stumbled, crying out in pain, and Zafina saw his skin around the wound start to turn gray, like the silver was poisoning him from the inside out. Silver bullets, silver weapons, UV grenades, Yongo said, pulling a remote from his pocket. We came prepared. Now, you're going to tell me where all your assets are, and then you're going to sign them over to me. Or I'm going to make you watch while my men kill your little girlfriend very, very slowly. He gestured, and 2 of his men moved toward the tunnel where Zafina was hiding. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself small, but they had seen the door. They were coming. Jihyuk looked up, his eyes meeting hers through the crack in the door. And in that look, she saw everything. Apology, determination, love, and goodbye. You want my assets? Jihyuk said to Yongo. Come and take them. He pulled the silver spear from his shoulder with a scream of agony, then moved. Not toward Yongo, toward the tunnel, toward her. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her out, and before she could protest, he had positioned himself between her and every gun in the room. You want to shoot her? You'll have to go through me first. That can be arranged, Yongo said, raising his hand to signal his men. Wait, Zafina shouted. I'll do it. I'll send you the information. Everything you wanted from the vault. Just don't hurt him. Please. Yongo lowered his hand, considering. You have it? The documents. I photographed them before he found me. Zafina lied. They're on my phone. I'll send them to you right now if you leave. Take the information and go. That's what you wanted, right? The money? Show me, Yongo demanded. Zafina pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She hadn't actually photographed anything, but she pulled up her camera roll and started scrolling through photos, buying time, trying to think of a plan. Behind her, she felt Jihyuk's hand on her back, steady despite the silver poisoning his system. "She's stalling," one of Yongo's men said. "There's nothing there." "You're right," Yongo said, his smile turning cruel. "She's lying, which means we do this the hard way." He raised his hand again, and this time, Zafina knew there was no more talking, no more bargaining. This was it. But then the lights went out. Every single light in the basement, plunging them into absolute darkness. And in that darkness, Jihyuk's voice whispered in her ear, "Close your eyes, and don't let go of me." She did. She closed her eyes and held onto him, and she felt him move, felt the wind of his passage as he carried her through the darkness, as screams erupted around them, as Yongo's men fired blindly into the dark, hitting each other more often than they hit anything else. When the lights came back on, emergency generators kicking in, Yongo and half his men were on the ground, unconscious or groaning in pain. The others had fled, running back up the stairs in terror. And Jihyuk stood in the center of the basement, Zafina safe behind him, his eyes glowing blood red, his fangs fully extended, every inch the monster Yongo had tried to exploit. "Leave Seoul," Jihyuk said, his voice echoing with otherworldly power. "Tonight, take your men and disappear. If I ever see you again, if you ever threaten her or her family again, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. And when I find you, I will remind you that there are worse things than death. I've had 300 years to learn every single one of them." Yongo stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. Then he scrambled to his feet and ran, his remaining men following, leaving behind weapons and wounded and any pretense of dignity. The moment they were gone, Jihyuk collapsed. The silver poisoning had spread, gray veins visible beneath his pale skin. His breathing labored and wrong. Zafina caught him, lowering him to the ground, cradling his head in her lap. "You're dying," she whispered, tears falling on his face. "Silver poisoning," he managed. "There's only one cure." "What? Tell me what to do." He looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw the struggle, the hunger, the need, the fear of what he might do. "Fresh blood," he whispered. "Willingly given. But I might not stop. Might kill you." Zafina didn't hesitate. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing the veins in her wrist. "Then don't kill me. You've had 300 years to learn control. Trust yourself." "Zafina, drink," she commanded. "That's an order from your housemaid. And I've been a very good employee for 3 weeks, so you owe me this." Despite everything, the pain, the poison, the fear, Jihyuk laughed. A weak, breathless sound, but a laugh nonetheless. Then he brought her wrist to his lips and bit down. If you're still watching this, thank you so much. We're about to get to the most intense part of the story, and I cannot wait to share part 2 with you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss it. And please, drop a comment telling me what you think. Should Zafina trust Jihyuk after everything he's done? Is love enough to forgive manipulation? Let me know your thoughts below. And don't forget to like this video to help it reach more people who love supernatural romance. Now, let's see what happens next. The bite wasn't what she expected. It hurt for just a moment, a sharp sting, and then warmth flooded through her. Not pain, something else. Something almost pleasant, intimate, like he was sharing more than just feeding. She could feel his emotions through the connection. His hunger, yes, but also his guilt, his fear of hurting her, his desperate love that he had tried so hard to deny. She held him, stroking his hair with her free hand, whispering reassurances. "It's okay. I'm okay. Take what you need." She could feel him drinking, could feel her blood flowing into him, healing the silver poisoning, bringing color back to his gray skin. But she could also feel him fighting himself, struggling to stop before he took too much, even though every instinct screamed at him to drink more, to feed until there was nothing left. Finally, with what looked like superhuman effort, which it was, she supposed, he pulled away, His fangs retracted. His eyes faded from crimson back to their normal dark color, and he looked up at her with an expression of wonder and shame and love all mixed together. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice rough. "After everything I've done. After all my lies." Zafina felt dizzy from blood loss, but she smiled anyway. "Because somewhere between the fear and the rules and the dead roses, I fell in love with you. And love isn't about logic or good decisions. It's about choosing someone even when they're terrible at being honest. Even when they manipulate your entire life because they're too scared to just ask you on a date like a normal person." "I'm sorry," Jihyuk said, and she could hear 300 years of regret in those two words. "I'm sorry I brought you here through manipulation. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I saw you as a replacement at first instead of seeing you for who you are. You deserved better. You deserve better." "Yes, I do," Zafina agreed. "And you're going to spend a very long time making it up to me, starting with saving my mother." "Already done," Jihyuk said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. He showed her a bank transfer dated that morning. 5 million won sent to her mother's hospital in Lagos, with a note authorizing payment for all medical expenses. "I did it this morning before Yango came, before you found the vault. I was going to tell you, but then everything fell apart." Zafina stared at the screen, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You saved her. I saved the person you love most in the world. It's the least I could do after putting you in danger." He cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I love you, Zafina Mensah, not because you look like someone I lost, but because you're stubborn and brave and you make me want to be better than the monster I've been for 300 years. I love you, and that's why you have to leave." "What?" Jihyuk sat up, though the effort clearly cost him. "Your debt is cleared. Your mother is saved. You can go back to your life. Go back to school, have a normal existence. Daylight and friends and a future. Everything I can't give you." "And what if I don't want normal?" Zafina demanded. "What if I want strange and complicated and immortal?" "You'll change your mind. In a year. 5 years. 20 years when you're aging and I'm still frozen at 35. You'll resent me. You'll hate what I am. And I can't watch that happen. So you're deciding for both of us? After everything?" "I'm sorry," Jihyuk said, and she could hear 300 years of regret in those two words. "I'm sorry I brought you here through manipulation. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I saw you as a replacement at first instead of seeing you for who you are. You deserved better. You deserve better." "Yes, I do," Zafina agreed. "And you're going to spend a very long time making it up to me, starting with saving my mother." "Already done," Jihyuk said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. He showed her a bank transfer dated that morning. 5 million won sent to her mother's hospital in Lagos, with a note authorizing payment for all medical expenses. "I did it this morning before Yango came, before you found the vault. I was going to tell you, but then everything fell apart." Zafina stared at the screen, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You saved her. I saved the person you love most in the world. It's the least I could do after putting you in danger." He cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I love you, Zafina Mensah, not because you look like someone I lost, but because you're stubborn and brave and you make me want to be better than the monster I've been for 300 years. I love you, and that's why you have to leave." "What?" Jihyuk sat up, though the effort clearly cost him. "Your debt is cleared. Your mother is saved. You can go back to your life. Go back to school, have a normal existence. Daylight and friends and a future. Everything I can't give you." "And what if I don't want normal?" Zafina demanded. "What if I want strange and complicated and immortal?" "You'll change your mind. In a year. 5 years. 20 years when you're aging and I'm still frozen at 35. You'll resent me. You'll hate what I am. And I can't watch that happen." "So you're deciding for both of us? After everything?" "I'm deciding based on 300 years of watching people I care about die because of what I am." Zafina grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "I'm not her. Your wife, Mina." I'm not going to die because you're scared to love someone again. How do you know that? I don't, Zafina admitted. None of us knows how long we have. That's what makes it precious. But I know I don't want to waste whatever time I have running away from something real just because it's scary. Jihyuk stared at her, and she could see him wavering. 300 years of isolation fighting against the possibility of connection. Finally, he whispered, "If you come back, after you see your mother, after you have time to think about this without my influence, if you still want this insane, impossible thing, I won't turn you away. I'll be here. I'm always here." "Then that's what I'll do," Zafina said. She leaned forward and kissed him, tasting her own blood on his lips, and she didn't care. "I'm going to Lagos. I'm going to make sure my mother is okay. And then I'm coming back. And you better have those roses blooming by the time I do." "That might take some work," Jihyuk said. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. "You have eternity," Zafina pointed out. "I think you can manage." They sat together in the basement surrounded by the evidence of violence and survival, and for the first time in 300 years, Min Jihyuk believed that maybe, just maybe, he could have something more than darkness. But that's a story for part 2. Thank you so much for watching part 1. I hope you loved Zafina and Jihyuk's story so far. Part 2 is going to be even more intense, with Zafina making an impossible choice and a love that transcends time and death itself. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Drop a like if you enjoyed this, leave a comment telling me your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next part. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the monsters we fear are just lonely souls looking for connection.